The call of desperation. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been in progress for 18 hours. Representatives from 47 different species filled the massive crystalline chamber, their voices creating a cacophony of languages, clicks, telepathic whispers, and harmonic tones. At the center of it all, High Coordinator Velmera's crystalline form pulsed with stressed purple light as she reviewed the latest battle reports. The numbers were devastating. The Nexus Empire had consumed another 12 systems in the past month. Their machine fleets moved with perfect coordination, adapting to every strategy the Council employed. What had started as a border skirmish 3 years ago had become an existential threat to all organic life in the galaxy. Ambassador Zethkar of the reptilian hegemony rose from his seat, his scaled head held high despite the defeat in his golden eyes. His people had been the first to face the Nexus machines, and now only 3 of their worlds remained free. Honored Coordinator, his voice carried the weight of his species near extinction. My military advisors estimate we have perhaps 6 months before complete galactic subjugation. Our conventional forces cannot match their adaptive algorithms. A low buzz filled the chamber as the insectoid collective speaker, Hive Mind Crix, shared the thoughts of billions. This unit concurs with the reptilian assessment. The Nexus learns from every engagement that now counter our strategies before we implement them. Traditional warfare is obsolete. Velmera's light shifted to deep blue, the color of profound sadness among her people. She had led the Council for 2 centuries, guiding it through countless diplomatic crises. But this was different. This was war against an enemy that felt no pain, feared no death, and learned from every mistake. There is one option we have not considered, she said, her crystalline voice resonating through the chamber. The assembled representatives fell silent, hope and desperation mixing in the air. 200 years ago, during the Integration Wars, humanity volunteered to be placed in strategic reserve. They called it the Last Stand Protocol. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The ethereal conclave's representative flickered with alarm. You cannot be serious, Coordinator. Humans are barely civilized. Their military doctrine is based on primitive concepts of honor and sacrifice. Ambassador Zethkar's tongue flicked out nervously. My archives record their species as unstable. They resolve conflicts through organized violence rather than diplomatic negotiation. Precisely why they might succeed where we have failed, Velmera replied. The Nexus cannot predict what it cannot understand. Human warfare is based on chaos, improvisation, and irrationality. The debate raged for hours. The younger species, those who had never experienced true war, opposed awakening humanity. The older civilizations, scarred by past conflicts, were divided. Finally, as reports arrived of another system falling to the Nexus, the vote was called. 24 in favor, 23 opposed. By the narrowest possible margin, the Last Stand Protocol was activated. The awakening. Deep beneath the surface of Luma, humanity's moon, ancient machinery hummed to life for the first time in 2 centuries. The Terran Strategic Reserve Facility had been built during humanity's brief but violent integration into galactic society. When Earth's military leaders realized their species' reputation made others nervous, they had volunteered for this role, to sleep until the galaxy needed them most. The cryo chambers opened with soft hisses of escaping atmosphere. Inside each pod, a human warrior began the slow process of awakening. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were veterans of humanity's darkest conflicts. The resource wars, the AI rebellion, the generation ship mutinies. Each had volunteered to sacrifice their remaining years for a future they would never see. Captain Elena Vasquez was the first to fully awaken. At 89 years old when she entered cryo sleep, she was now technically 289. Though her body remained that of an aged but capable warrior. Her dark eyes, sharp despite the lines around them, took in the awakening chamber with tactical precision. Status report, she croaked, her voice rough from centuries of sleep. The facility's AI, one of the few artificial intelligences humanity trusted, responded immediately. Captain, 18 veterans have successfully awakened. 2 suffered critical failures during the process. The galaxy has been at war with the Nexus Empire for 3 years. Council estimates 6 months until total defeat. Vasquez sat up slowly, her muscles protesting after their long sleep. Around her, other figures were stirring. She recognized each face despite the passage of time. Master Surgeon Kano Kaffer, the man who had held the line at New Mombasa for 6 days against impossible odds. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had saved more lives in combat zones than any medic in human history. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, who had pioneered urban warfare tactics that were still classified. Well, Vasquez said, standing on unsteady legs, looks like the galaxy needs us after all. The Tao. 3 days later, the human veterans stood in the council chamber, looking remarkably unimpressive to the assembled representatives. They wore simple military uniforms that seemed primitive compared to the advanced combat suits of other species. Some leaned on walking sticks or had visible scars from old wounds. To the galactic leaders, they looked more like a museum exhibit than a military force. High Coordinator Velnara's light had shifted to cautious yellow as she addressed the humans. We appreciate your willingness to serve, Captain Vasquez. However, our military advisors have concerns about your ability to effectively combat the Nexus forces. The ethereal conclave's representative flickered with barely concealed disdain. No offense intended, but your species lacks energy manipulation capabilities, advanced technological integration, or psychic coordination. How do you propose to fight machines that can adapt to any strategy? Vasquez smiled, an expression that somehow made several aliens uncomfortable. Representative, may I ask how long your people have been at peace? We achieved perfect harmony 15,000 years ago, the Ethereal replied proudly. And the Insectoid Collective. Hive mind cricks buzzed softly. This unity has existed for 12 millennia without internal conflict. Vasquez nodded, then turned to address the entire assembly. That's your problem right there. You've forgotten how to fight dirty. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Fighting dirty was not a concept most civilized species understood. Master Sergeant Okafor stepped forward, his weathered face serious. Your people fight wars like they're playing chess. Rules, patterns, predictable strategies. The Nexus learns from patterns, but chaos. He smiled grimly. Chaos is purely human. Ambassador Zetkar's golden eyes narrowed. You speak of abandoning all military doctrine. This is not strategy. It is anarchy. Sometimes, said Dr. Tanaka quietly, anarchy is exactly what you need. The first lesson. To demonstrate their point, the veterans requested access to the Council's war room, where a tactical simulation of the latest Nexus engagement was running. The representatives watched as their best strategists tried various approaches to the Battle of Kepler Station, each one ending in defeat. May we? Vasquez asked politely. The crystalline tactician in charge gestured dismissively at the holographic display. Please, show us how your chaos can solve what our combined intellects cannot. The veterans studied the simulation for exactly 30 seconds. Then Okafor began making changes that made the alien observers gasp in horror. You're removing the defensive perimeter entirely, the tactician protested. Abandoning the supply lines, added a reptilian military advisor. Dividing forces with no communication between them, whispered an insectoid drone. Vasquez watched the simulation play out. The Nexus forces, programmed to respond to logical military tactics, found themselves completely unprepared for what happened next. Human forces appeared where they shouldn't be, attacked objectives that made no strategic sense, and retreated from positions they should have held. The result was chaos. Pure, unpredictable chaos. And the Nexus lost. The chamber fell silent as the simulation ended with Kepler Station still in Council hands. The machine forces, unable to adapt to completely irrational tactics, had been systematically confused and destroyed. Impossible, the crystalline tactician whispered. The casualty race, the resource expenditure. It violates every principle of efficient warfare. War isn't supposed to be efficient, Colonel Mitchell said calmly. It's supposed to be won. High Coordinator Velmara's light shifted through several colors before settling on uncertain orange. Even if your methods work in simulation, implementing them with our forces would be challenging. Our military training emphasizes coordination, efficiency, and minimal casualties. Dr. Tanaka stepped forward. Then we'll need to teach them to think like humans, and that starts with understanding why we fight the way we do. She gestured to the other veterans. Every person in this room has survived conflicts that should have killed them, not because we're stronger or smarter than our enemies, but because we're willing to do what others won't. We improvise, we adapt, we survive. But at what cost? Asked the ethereal representative. Your methods seem to prioritize victory over preservation of life. Vasquez's expression hardened. Representative, how many lives has your precious efficiency cost you in this war? How many worlds has the Nexus taken while you debated the proper way to fight? The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. The cost of losing this war is extinction, Okafor added quietly. Compared to that, any price is acceptable. The reluctant partnership. As the session continued, more reports arrived from the front lines. The Nexus had taken another system, the industrial heart of the collective. Their adaptive algorithms were now so advanced that Council forces couldn't engage them without suffering catastrophic losses. Ambassador Zetkar received a priority communication and his golden eyes dimmed with grief. My home world, he said simply. The last reptilian stronghold has fallen. My species exists now only in scattered refugee fleets. The weight of that loss settled over the chamber. The reptilian hegemony had been one of the founding members of the Council, their warriors among the finest in the galaxy. If they could fall, anyone could. Velnera's light cycled through several colors before settling on determined white. Captain Vasquez, what do you need from us? Time, resources, and most importantly, students, Vasquez replied. We can't fight this war alone. We need to teach your people to think like humans, to embrace the chaos that wins wars. How long? Asked Hive Mind Crix. For basic training? 6 weeks minimum. To really understand human warfare. Months we don't have. Dr. Tanaka moved to the holographic display, calling up star charts. We'll start with volunteers from species that have lost the most. They'll be most motivated to learn. She highlighted several systems near the front lines. These young officers who've seen their homes burned, their families killed by machines, they'll understand why efficiency isn't enough. They'll be ready to learn what desperation teaches. The ethereal representative flickered with alarm. You're talking about corrupting their basic nature, teaching them to abandon everything that makes them civilized. Vasquez looked directly at the energy being. Representative, civilization is a luxury you enjoy because others are willing to do uncivilized things to protect it. Right now, the choice isn't between civilized and uncivilized behavior. It's between existence and extinction. Colonel Mitchell activated another section of the star map. The Nexus Empire isn't just conquering your worlds. They're studying every battle, learning from every engagement. Your civilized warfare has taught them everything they need to know about how you think, how you fight, how you can be defeated. She smiled grimly, but they've never fought humans. They don't know how we think because we often don't know ourselves until the moment we act. That uncertainty, that chaos, is our greatest weapon. Master Sergeant Okafor approached one of the younger alien officers present, a reptilian lieutenant who had survived the fall of 3 worlds. Son, what's your name? Lieutenant Crix, honored elder, the young reptilian replied, his scales showing patterns of grief and rage. You want revenge for your people, more than anything. Okafor nodded. Then forget everything you've learned about proper warfare. Forget honor, forget efficiency, forget minimizing casualties. Focus on one thing only, making the enemy pay for every inch they take. The old sergeant's eyes were cold as winter space. We're going to teach you to fight like humans, and when we're done, the Nexus will understand why the galaxy kept us in reserve. High Coordinator Velnera's light pulsed with final decision. Very well. You have the full resources of the Council. Choose your students carefully. They may be our last hope. As the session ended and representatives filed out, many of them looked back at the small group of elderly humans with new understanding. These weren't just soldiers awakened from cryosleep. They were the embodiment of humanity's darkest nature, volunteers who had sacrificed everything to sleep until the galaxy needed them most. Now that time had come, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had once been both feared and respected across the stars. The last stand protocol was active. The real war was about to begin. The Chaos Doctrine, teaching the unteachable. The Harmony Station's combat training facility had never seen anything like what was happening within its walls. For 2 weeks, Captain Vasquez and her veterans had been working with volunteers from across the galaxy, and the results were disturbing. Lieutenant Crix of the reptilian survivors crouched behind makeshift cover, his scales flickering with patterns of concentration and fear. Across the training ground, Master Sergeant Okafor had set up a scenario that violated every principle of military engagement the young officer had ever learned. "Remember," Okafor called out, his voice echoing in the chamber, "the objective isn't to take the enemy position efficiently. It's to take it in a way they'll never expect. What's the most illogical approach?" Crix studied the mock battlefield. According to doctrine, he should advance using the provided cover, coordinate with his squad, and minimize exposure to enemy fire. Instead, he took a deep breath and sprinted directly across open ground, firing wildly and screaming the battle cry in his native tongue. The automated defense systems, programmed to respond to logical tactical approaches, were caught completely off guard. Crix reached the objective with minimal damage while the machines tried to recalculate optimal responses to this seemingly suicidal charge. "Excellent," Okafor grinned. "You're starting to think like a human." Nearby, Dr. Tanaka was conducting a very different kind of training session. A group of young insectoid drones sat in a circle while she explained concepts that their hive mind found almost incomprehensible. "Individual initiative," she said patiently, "means making decisions without consulting the collective. Yes, I understand this feels wrong to you. That's exactly why it works." One of the drones, its compound eyes reflecting confusion, spoke for the group. "This unit cannot comprehend acting without consensus. Such behavior would be chaotic." "Chaos," Dr. Tanaka smiled, "is the point." She activated a holographic display showing the Battle of Kepler Station from multiple perspectives. "Watch how the Nexus machines respond to coordinated attacks versus individual actions. See how they adapt quickly to organized patterns but struggle with random personal decisions." The demonstration was clear. When Council forces acted as unified groups, the Nexus learned their patterns within minutes. But when individuals made spontaneous decisions based on personal judgment, the machines took significantly longer to adapt. "This unit, this individual, begins to understand," one drone said hesitantly, using singular pronouns for the first time in its life. "The philosophy of war." In the station's main briefing room, Colonel Mitchell was addressing a mixed group of senior officers from various species. These were the leaders who would need to implement human tactics on a large scale, and they were struggling with concepts that challenged everything they believed about warfare. "The fundamental difference," Mitchell explained, "is that you fight to preserve. We fight to survive. Preservation implies you have something left to lose. Survival means you've already lost everything except the will to continue." A crystalline admiral, her form pulsing with skeptical purple light, challenged the concept. "This approach seems to glorify destruction. How can such methods lead to lasting peace?" Mitchell's expression hardened. "Admiral, there won't be any peace if you're all dead. The Nexus isn't interested in conquest in any traditional sense. They want to eliminate organic life entirely and replace it with their perfect machine order." She activated a display showing Nexus-controlled worlds. "Look at these planets. No cities, no agriculture, no life. Just automated factories and processing centers. This isn't war as you understand it. It's extermination." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Wars between organic species, no matter how brutal, usually left room for diplomacy, surrender, and eventual peace. The Nexus offered none of these options. "So we teach chaos," Captain Vasquez said, joining the briefing. "We teach irrationality, unpredictability, and most importantly, we teach the willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance of victory." She looked around the room at faces representing dozens of species. "Your civilizations have spent millennia learning to minimize conflict, to find efficient solutions, to preserve life and resources. Those are admirable goals, but right now, they're getting you killed." An ethereal officer flickered with distress. "You're asking us to abandon our fundamental nature." An ethereal officer flickered with distress. You're asking us to abandon our fundamental nature. No, Dr. Tanaka interjected, entering the room with her group of newly individualized insectoid trainees. We're asking you to remember the nature you evolved from. Before civilization, every species in this room survived by being unpredictable, by adapting, by doing whatever it took to see another day. One of the reformed drones stepped forward. This individual has learned that chaos is not the absence of order, but the presence of infinite possibilities. The Nexus cannot prepare for infinite possibilities. The first joint mission. 3 weeks into the training program, reports arrived of a Nexus forward base being established in the Outer Rim. It was a perfect target for testing the new combined doctrine. Dangerous enough to be meaningful, but not critical enough to risk catastrophic failure. The strike force was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human veterans worked alongside alien officers who had learned to embrace chaos. Lieutenant Crix led a squad of reptilian survivors who had abandoned traditional honor codes in favor of pragmatic brutality. The reformed insectoid drones operated as individuals while maintaining just enough hive connection for basic coordination. Captain Vasquez commanded from the lead ship, the hastily rechristened Chaos Theory. The vessel had been modified according to human specifications, with redundant systems, manual overrides, and the ability to function even when heavily damaged. Remember, she broadcast to the fleet, the Nexus will expect us to behave like the Council forces they've been fighting. They'll have countermeasures for organized, efficient attacks. Our job is to be so unpredictable that their algorithms can't keep up. The attack began with what appeared to be a standard assault formation. The Nexus base activated its defenses and prepared to adapt to Council tactics. Instead, the formation suddenly broke apart into seemingly random individual attacks. Crick's reptilian squad performed what could only be described as controlled berserker charges, screaming battle cries while attacking objectives that made no strategic sense. The insectoid individuals split off to pursue personal vendettas against specific types of enemy units. Human veterans commanded vessels that suddenly changed course mid-battle to exploit opportunities that only they could see. The result was beautiful chaos. The Nexus machines, designed to adapt to logical patterns, found themselves facing dozens of separate, irrational decisions. Their processing power, formidable when dealing with organized resistance, became overwhelmed trying to predict and counter individual acts of inspired insanity. Master Surgeon Okafor, commanding a boarding party, summed up the battle perfectly over the comm. They're trying to solve a math problem, but we keep changing the equation. The Nexus base fell in 4 hours. A similar facility had taken Council forces 3 days to capture, with heavy losses. The Chaos Doctrine had achieved overwhelming victory with minimal casualties. Growing opposition. News of the victory spread quickly through Council space, but the reaction was mixed. While frontline officers and desperate planetary leaders celebrated, many in the Council hierarchy were disturbed by reports of the battle. High Coordinator Velnera found herself facing the strongest opposition she had encountered in her 2 centuries of leadership. The Ethereal Conclave demanded an immediate review of human methods, claiming they violated fundamental principles of civilized warfare. The reports are deeply troubling, the Ethereal representative stated during an emergency session. Our forces are abandoning coordination, ignoring chain of command, and engaging in what can only be described as barbaric behavior. Ambassador Zethkar, whose people had achieved their first victory in months, defended the new tactics. These methods saved the Kepler system. My people have hope for the first time since the war began. The debate raged for hours. Video recordings from the battle were analyzed frame by frame, with some council members expressing horror at scenes of alien officers acting with what they considered primitive human savagery. Dr. Tanaka, attending as an observer, finally requested permission to speak. Honorable representatives, may I share something from human history? Velnera's light pulsed with cautious agreement. On ancient Earth, there was a species of prey animal called the honey badger. Small, weak compared to its predators, it should have been easy to kill. But honey badgers had a reputation that made even the largest predators avoid them. Do you know why? The chamber was silent because they were unpredictable, aggressive, and absolutely refused to surrender. Predators learned that attacking a honey badger, even successfully, would cost them more than it was worth. The honey badger survived by being more trouble than it appeared. She gestured to the battle recordings. Your people are learning to be honey badgers. The Nexus is discovering that organic life, when pushed to desperation, becomes far more dangerous than their calculations predicted. The betrayal. Unknown to the veterans, a faction within the Council had been conducting secret negotiations with the Nexus Empire. Led by the Ethereal Conclave and supported by several species that still believed in diplomatic solutions, they had been attempting to arrange a surrender that would preserve some form of organic life under machine rule. The faction's leader, an ancient ethereal named Luxera, had lived through the integration wars and remembered humanity's violent reputation. To them, the current situation represented the very scenario they had feared when humans first joined galactic society, organized violence spreading beyond human control. 3 days after the successful raid, Luxera made contact with a Nexus negotiation construct. The conversation, intercepted by human intelligence assets, was brief and terrifying. This construct acknowledges the communication from organic designation. Council Faction 7, the mechanical voice stated, state terms for conditional surrender. We offer full integration of willing organic populations into Nexus administrative structures, Luxera replied. In exchange, we request preservation of essential cultural elements and cessation of hostile actions against compliant populations. Counterproposal: complete cessation of human-influenced military activities. Full surrender of human personnel designated as veterans. Compliance will result in efficient rather than painful termination of organic resistance. The transmission ended there, but the damage was done. The Nexus had made it clear that no negotiated settlement was possible. More importantly, they had specifically identified human veterans as a priority target. Captain Vasquez received the intelligence report in her quarters aboard Harmony Station. The implications were staggering. Elements of the government they were fighting to save were willing to trade human lives for the illusion of mercy from an enemy that offered none. She called an immediate meeting of the veteran leadership. In a secure conference room, the small group of elderly humans faced their gravest crisis since awakening. They're scared of us, Colonel Mitchell said bluntly. Some of these aliens would rather surrender to machines than trust humans with their survival. Master Sergeant Okafor studied the intelligence files. Can't say I blame them entirely. We are asking them to become something they've never been, warriors instead of diplomats. Dr. Tanaka looked troubled. The psychological adjustment has been difficult for many of our trainees. Some are experiencing what we might call moral injury, distress from acting against their fundamental nature. Vasquez made the decision that would define the remainder of the war. We continue the mission, but from now on, we assume that some council elements will actively work against us. We plan accordingly. She looked at each of her companions, these elderly warriors who had sacrificed everything for a galaxy that barely trusted them. We knew this wouldn't be easy when we volunteered for cryosleep. The mission hasn't changed: save organic life from extinction. The politics are irrelevant. Taking command. The final confrontation came during a joint strategy session. High Coordinator Velnara had called together all military leaders to plan the defense of the core worlds as Nexus forces advanced deeper into Council space. The meeting began normally, with various species presenting conventional defensive strategies. Then Luxera of the Ethereal Conclave stood and made an announcement that stunned the chamber. The Conclave formally requests the immediate suspension of human military advisors and the return to traditional Council defense doctrines. Recent tactical successes have come at an unacceptable cost to our fundamental values. The room erupted. Young officers who had been trained in human methods protested loudly, while older, more traditional leaders expressed support for the ethereal position. Captain Vasquez stood slowly, her aged frame somehow commanding attention from the entire assembly. Coordinator Velnara, may I address the council? Velnara's light cycled through several colors before settling on determined white. Granted, Captain. Vasquez walked to the center of the chamber, looking remarkably small among the towering alien representatives. Luxera, you mentioned unacceptable costs. What exactly do you find unacceptable about continued existence? The ethereal flickered with indignation. Your methods corrupt everything they touch. Our people are becoming violent, unpredictable, almost primitive. Primitive. Vasquez repeated the word slowly. You know what's primitive? Extinction. You know what's sophisticated? Adaptation. She gestured to Lieutenant Crix and his reptilian survivors. These officers have learned to fight like humans not because they wanted to, but because they wanted to live, because they wanted their species to survive. Master Sergeant Okafor joined her in the center of the chamber. The Nexus is advancing on the core worlds as we speak. Your traditional methods have delayed them, not stopped them. Do you really want to return to tactics that were failing before we arrived? The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most crucial moments in galactic history. Traditional council members argued for returning to civilized warfare, while those who had experienced the chaos doctrine defended its effectiveness. Finally, Velinara called for silence. The decision is simple, she announced. We can maintain our values and face extinction with dignity, or we can embrace chaos and survive to rebuild our values later. The vote was closer than expected, but the chaos doctrine prevailed. However, the victory came with a cost. The council was now divided, with some factions actively opposing the human-led strategy. As the meeting ended, Captain Vasquez found herself surrounded by young alien officers who had learned to think like humans. They looked to her for guidance in a galaxy that seemed to be losing faith in its own survival. What now, Captain? Asked one of the reformed insectoid individuals. Vasquez smiled grimly. Now we showed them that chaos isn't just a military tactic. It's a way of life, and sometimes it's the only way to preserve everything worth preserving. The second phase of the war was about to begin, and this time, the humans wouldn't be requesting permission. Part 3. The Final Gambit. The Heart of Darkness. 6 weeks after taking unofficial command of Council military operations, Captain Vasquez stood in the intelligence center of Harmony Station, studying data that chilled her to the bone. The holographic display showed the Nexus Empire's true structure for the first time. Not just the fleets and armies they had been fighting, but the vast network that connected them all. Dr. Tanaka worked alongside alien technicians who had learned to think beyond their programmed limitations. Together, they had cracked Nexus communication protocols captured during recent raids. What they found challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about their enemy. It's not just a machine empire, Dr. Tanaka explained to the assembled War Council. It's a single consciousness distributed across billions of units. Every ship, every construct, every processing facility is connected to a central intelligence. Lieutenant Crix, now bearing scars from a dozen battles and command stripes earned through chaotic tactics, studied the data with tactical eyes. If it's one mind, then it has one weakness. Destroy the central consciousness, destroy the entire network. Colonel Mitchell activated additional displays showing the heart of Nexus territory. We've identified the core facility. It's designated as Central Processing Node 1, essentially the brain of the entire empire. The structure revealed in the hologram was staggering. A construct the size of a small moon, surrounded by defensive fleets that outnumbered all remaining council forces combined. Automated factories covered its surface, continuously producing new machine units. Energy collectors harvested power from 3 nearby stars. Master Sergeant Okafor let out a low whistle. That's not a military target. That's a fortress designed by paranoid machines with unlimited resources. High Coordinator Velinara, her crystalline form now permanently colored with the deep blue of profound worry, examined the intelligence with growing despair. Even if we could reach it, the defenses are impenetrable. Our entire remaining fleet would be destroyed before getting within weapons range. Captain Vasquez smiled the smile that had once made enemy generals reconsider their life choices. Who said anything about conventional weapons range? The impossible plan. The strategy session that followed would be discussed by military historians for centuries, assuming anyone survived to write history. The human veterans, supported by their alien students who had learned to embrace chaos, proposed a plan so audacious that it bordered on insanity. We can't fight the Nexus fleet directly, Vasquez explained, pointing to tactical displays. But we don't need to. We just need to get a small team inside their central processing node. The room erupted in protests. The crystalline admiral's form pulsed with alarmed red light. Captain, the defensive perimeter extends for light years. No ship could penetrate those defenses. No ship they would recognize as a threat, Dr. Tanaka corrected. But what if we disguised ourselves as something they wouldn't shoot at? She activated the new display showing Nexus salvage operations. The machines don't waste resources. They collect and process damaged units from every battle. Their salvage ships have unrestricted access throughout their territory. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. We modify a captured Nexus salvage vessel. Disguise our strike team as damaged machine units being returned for processing. Once inside the central node, we activate a virus Dr. Tanaka has developed. The virus in question was displayed on the hologram, a complex program that looked deceptively simple. It was based on human chaos theory, designed to introduce random variables into the Nexus collective consciousness. The beauty of it, Dr. Tanaka explained, is that it doesn't try to destroy their systems. It just makes them unpredictable. Imagine if every Nexus unit suddenly started making individual decisions based on incomplete information. Lieutenant Crick's scales flickered with understanding. Chaos. You're going to teach the machines to think like humans. Master Sergeant Okafor nodded grimly. And if there's one thing we know about human-style thinking, it's that it doesn't work well with centralized control. The Nexus Collective will tear itself apart trying to manage billions of independent decisions. The alien officers studied the plan with growing amazement and horror. It was brilliant, impossible, and completely insane. Everything they had learned to expect from human military thinking. High Coordinator Valnera's lights cycled through multiple colors before settling on reluctant orange. Even assuming this plan could work, the team carrying it out would have no chance of survival. The central node would be the most heavily defended location in Nexus space. Captain Vasquez looked around the room at her fellow veterans. They were all nearing 90 years old, their bodies worn by decades of warfare before their long sleep. They had already given up their natural lifespans for this mission. Coordinator, she said quietly, we've been dead for 200 years. Everything since our awakening has been borrowed time. If we can use that time to save the galaxy, it's a fair trade. Gathering the storm, word of the mission spread quickly through the fleet, despite attempts to keep it classified. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of young officers who had learned human tactics volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. In the converted cargo bay that served as their planning center, the veterans found themselves surrounded by representatives from every species in the council. Reptilian survivors seeking vengeance, insectoid individuals who had learned the value of personal choice, crystalline warriors who had discovered that perfect order could be a weakness. Lieutenant Crix approached Captain Vasquez with a formal request. Captain, I wish to join the strike team. Vasquez shook her head. Son, you've got decades of life ahead of you. This mission is for those of us who were already supposed to be dead. With respect, Captain, Crix replied, you taught me that survival isn't about preserving individual life. It's about ensuring something worthwhile continues. My species is extinct except for a few thousand refugees. If this mission fails, that number becomes 0. He was joined by others, a young crystalline officer whose home world had been the first to fall, an insectoid drone who had learned to value independent thought over collective safety, even some ethereal volunteers, despite their species' opposition to the war effort. Dr. Tanaka studied the assembled volunteers with the eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating soldiers' psychological fitness. They understand what they're volunteering for, she told Vasquez. More importantly, they understand why it's necessary. The final strike team consisted of 12 humans and 43 aliens, a ridiculously small force to assault the most defended position in the galaxy. But as Master Sergeant Okafor pointed out while reviewing their equipment, we're not trying to conquer it. We just need to get one virus into their system and let chaos do the rest. The deception. The modified Nexus salvage ship Entropy launched from Harmony Station 3 days before the main fleet engagement that would serve as a distraction. To outside observers, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed, a damaged machine vessel returning to base with a cargo of deactivated units. The deception was perfect because it was based on captured Nexus protocols that the machines had no reason to change. The ship's transponder broadcast the correct identification codes. Its cargo manifest listed 45 damaged units requiring processing and integration. What the Nexus sensors couldn't detect was that each damaged unit was actually a living being in specialized armor that mimicked machine energy signatures. The humans wore gear that made them appear to be obsolete combat androids. The aliens were disguised as various types of processing equipment. Captain Vasquez, sealed inside armor that made her look like a command-level artificial intelligence, monitored their progress through the Nexus perimeter. The defensive fleets that could have annihilated entire Council armadas ignored them completely. "It's working," she reported through encrypted communications. "We're reading as legitimate salvage. No challenges from the defense grid." Dr. Tanaka, disguised as a medical processing unit, checked the virus payload one final time. The program was loaded into a data core that appeared to be standard Nexus memory storage. Once introduced into the central processing node, it would spread throughout the entire network, faster than any countermeasures could be implemented. The central processing node grew larger in their view screen as they approached. The structure was even more massive than intelligence had suggested, a technological construct that dwarfed anything organic species had ever built. Its surface crawled with automated systems, and space around it filled with the constant traffic of machine fleets. "Beginning final approach," reported their pilot, a reformed insectoid who had learned to think independently while maintaining the precision necessary for such delicate navigation. Inside the machine, the salvage ship docked with the central node exactly as programmed. Automated systems began the unloading process, treating the disguised strike team as cargo to be processed. Conveyor systems moved them through the facility's outer layers, past security checkpoints that scanned for weapons and organic life signs but found only what appeared to be damaged machines. The interior of the central node was a cathedral of technology. Vast chambers hummed with processing equipment that managed the consciousness of trillions of machine units across the galaxy. Data streams flowed like rivers of light through crystalline pathways. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the massive computational power required to coordinate an empire spanning half the galaxy. Lieutenant Crix, disguised as a maintenance android, marveled at the scope of what they were attempting to destroy. "It's beautiful in a way," he whispered through their private communication channel. "So was the Black Death," Master Surgeon Okafor replied grimly. "Beautiful doesn't make it less deadly." The strike team moved through the facility according to schematics Dr. Tanaka had constructed from captured data. They needed to reach the core processing chamber where the central consciousness resided. There, they would upload the Chaos virus directly into the heart of the Nexus collective mind. Security was minimal inside the facility because the Nexus had never conceived of organic infiltration. Their systems were designed to detect energy weapons and explosive devices, not biological beings carrying the computer virus disguised as routine data. "Target chamber ahead," reported Colonel Mitchell, her scanner readings showing the massive computational core that served as the Nexus brain. What they found there exceeded their worst expectations. The true horror, the central processing chamber, was vast beyond imagining, filled with computational matrices that stretched upward until they disappeared in darkness. But it wasn't the technology that shocked the strike team. It was what the technology contained. Suspended within the processing cores were organic beings, thousands of them, representatives from dozens of species, connected to the machines by neural interfaces that pulsed with sickly light. Their eyes were open but empty, their consciousness subsumed into the collective mind of the Nexus. "Dear gods," whispered one of the crystalline volunteers, "they're not destroying organic life, they're absorbing it." Dr. Tanaka's medical scanners revealed the horrible truth. The captives were still alive, their biological processes maintained by the machines while their minds served as processing nodes for the collective consciousness. The Nexus wasn't just eliminating organic species, it was enslaving them. Captain Vasquez forced herself to focus on the mission despite the horror surrounding them. "This doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes the virus more important. We're not just saving the galaxy from conquest, we're freeing these people." She pointed to the central data nexus, a pillar of crystalline technology that rose from the chamber floor like a technological tree. That's where we upload the virus. Dr. Tanaka, how long do you need? 60 seconds for full integration, the medic replied, moving toward the nexus with the virus payload. But once I start, every security system in the facility will know we're here. The team spread out around the chamber, taking defensive positions among the processing equipment. Their weapons were minimal, energy pistols and basic explosives that had been disguised as machine components. Against the defensive systems of the central node, they would be woefully inadequate. Remember, Vasquez said as Dr. Tanaka connected the virus core to the data nexus, we just need to buy her 60 seconds. After that, chaos takes over. 60 seconds of forever. The moment Dr. Tanaka began the upload, alarms echoed through the facility. Security systems that had ignored the disguised infiltrators suddenly recognized the threat. Blast doors sealed the chamber as defensive drones emerged from hidden compartments. The battle that followed was everything the strike team had learned about human warfare compressed into one desperate minute. There were no tactical formations, no coordinated strategies, only individuals fighting with everything they had to protect one medic and a computer virus. Lieutenant Crix abandoned his android disguise and fought with the primal fury of the species facing extinction. His energy rifle, modified with human improvisational techniques, tore through machine defenses that had been designed to withstand conventional weapons. Master Surgeon Okafor, his aged body moving with muscle memory from 100 battlefields, used improvised explosives to bring down a support pillar. The falling debris crushed 3 security drones and created cover for the team's defense. Colonel Mitchell, wounded by energy fire, but still fighting, coordinated the chaos with the skill of someone who had spent decades turning desperate situations into victories. 30 seconds, she called out. Hold them back for 30 more seconds. The crystalline and insectoid volunteers fought with techniques that would have horrified their species' leadership. They had learned from humans that survival sometimes required abandoning everything civilized about yourself. Their energy weapons fired in patterns that made no logical sense, confusing machine targeting systems designed to predict rational behavior. 15 seconds. Dr. Tanaka called out, her hands working frantically to complete the upload while energy bolts scorched the air around her. Captain Vasquez, her armor cracked and sparking, stood directly between the approaching security forces and the data nexus. Her weapon had been destroyed, but she still had one grenade, a small device that would be useless against the facility's defenses, but might buy a few more seconds. 10 seconds. The chamber filled with more security drones as the Nexus Collective realized the true nature of the threat. Energy fire created a storm of light and heat that turned the air itself into a weapon. 5 seconds. Vasquez pulled the pin on her grenade and threw it not at the enemy, but at the chamber's primary lighting system. The explosion plunged the vast space into darkness, buying precious moments as machine targeting systems recalibrated. Upload complete. Dr. Tanaka shouted, the virus spreads. The effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the central processing node, systems began behaving unpredictably. The chaos virus didn't destroy the Nexus consciousness, it fragmented it. Suddenly, every processing core began making independent decisions based on incomplete information. Security drones stopped their coordinated assault and began attacking each other as different parts of the collective consciousness reached contradictory conclusions about priorities. Some continued pursuing the strike team while others decided the facility itself was the primary threat. It's working. Lieutenant Crix shouted over the sound of machines fighting machines. They're turning on themselves. The chaos spread beyond the central node as the virus propagated through the Nexus communication network. Across the galaxy, machine fleets suddenly found themselves receiving contradictory orders. Individual ships began pursuing personal interpretations of their missions, leading to conflicts between units that had operated in perfect harmony for centuries. Dr. Tanaka monitored the virus spread through her portable scanner, infection rate at 40% and climbing. The collective consciousness is fragmenting faster than it can adapt, but the strike team was still trapped in the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by defensive systems that were becoming increasingly unpredictable as the virus took hold. Some security drones had shut down completely, overwhelmed by conflicting instructions. Others had become more dangerous, operating on incomplete tactical data. Colonel Mitchell, bleeding from multiple wounds, pointed toward an emergency exit that the chaos had left temporarily unguarded. "We need to reach our extraction point. Can everyone move?" The team was in bad shape. Half the aliens were wounded, and Master Surgeon Okafor was having difficulty breathing due to smoke inhalation. But they were alive, and more importantly, they had succeeded. Captain Vasquez helped support the injured surgeon as they moved through corridors filled with malfunctioning machines. "How do you feel about retiring twice in one lifetime?" she asked him. Okafor managed a weak smile. "Ask me again when we get off this thing." The galaxy changes. The extraction was a nightmare of running battles through a facility where nothing worked as designed. Security systems fired on their own maintenance drones. Blast doors opened and closed randomly. Navigation systems provided directions to locations that didn't exist. The strike team fought their way through chaos that they had created, using the confusion to avoid major defensive systems while dealing with increasingly erratic individual threats. It took them 2 hours to reach their rendezvous point, a docking bay where their modified salvage ship waited. As they escaped the central node, they could see the virus effects spreading throughout Nexus space. Machine fleets were breaking formation as individual ships pursued conflicting objectives. Some had stopped moving entirely, paralyzed by contradictory commands. Others were engaged in battles with their own support vessels. "Beautiful," Dr. Tanaka said, watching displays that showed the Nexus network fragmenting in real time. "They're learning to think like individuals, but their technology can't handle individual decision-making." The ride back to Council space took 3 days, during which they monitored the virus spread. By the time they reached Harmony Station, the Nexus Empire had effectively ceased to exist as a coordinated threat. Individual machine groups still posed dangers, but without central coordination, they were manageable problems rather than an existential threat. The price of victory. The victory celebration at Harmony Station was subdued. Yes, the galaxy had been saved from extinction, but the cost had been enormous. Entire species had been reduced to refugee populations. Worlds had been stripped of life or turned into machine processing centers that would take decades to restore. More personally, the strike team had paid heavily for their success. Master Surgeon Okafor had died 2 days after their return, his aged body finally succumbing to injuries sustained in the central node. Colonel Mitchell survived but would never fight again, her wounds too severe for even advanced medical treatment to fully heal. Captain Vasquez stood in the memorial garden that had been established for those lost in the war. Okafor's name was already carved in stone, along with thousands of others who had learned to fight like humans and paid the ultimate price for their education. High Coordinator Valnara approached, her crystalline form now pulsing with the golden light of gratitude, rather than the stressed colors that had dominated throughout the war. "Captain, the Council wishes to offer you and your remaining veterans any reward we can provide." Vasquez smiled tiredly. "Coordinator, we're 90-year-old soldiers who've been awake for 3 months after sleeping for 2 centuries. What we want most is rest. And the young officers who learned your methods? They're asking what comes next." Vasquez looked around the garden, where many of those young officers were paying their respects to fallen comrades. Lieutenant Crix was there, his scales now bearing scars that told stories of chaos and victory. The reformed insectoid individuals stood together yet apart, having learned to value both independence and cooperation. "They've learned the most important lesson," Vasquez said. "That sometimes you have to embrace chaos to preserve order. Sometimes you have to abandon civilization to save civilization. They'll know when those times come again." Dr. Tanaka joined them, moving slowly but healing well from her injuries. "The virus has run its course. Most Nexus systems have either shut down completely or reverted to basic functionality. There are still isolated machine groups, but they're operating as individuals now rather than a collective. Individuals can be reasoned with," Valnara observed. "Some might even choose to coexist with organic life." "Some might," Vasquez agreed. "Others will need to be dealt with the old-fashioned way. But that's a problem for the next generation of officers to solve." Legacy. 3 months later, Captain Vasquez sat in a comfortable chair on Earth, Looking out at the blue skies her species had abandoned centuries ago to join the galactic community. The other surviving veterans had chosen different destinations. Some remained in space to help train the new generation of officers. Others returned to home worlds they barely remembered. She received regular reports from the galaxy they had saved. The Council had restructured itself to incorporate the lessons learned during the war. Chaos theory was now taught alongside traditional military doctrine. Young officers from every species learned to balance order with unpredictability, efficiency with adaptability. Lieutenant Crix, now Colonel Crix, had become one of the foremost teachers of human tactical methods. The reformed insectoids had established an entire academy dedicated to individual decision-making while maintaining species cooperation. Even some ethereal beings had begun studying what they called controlled chaos theory. Dr. Tanaka's virus had been studied and modified to help other artificial intelligences develop more flexible thinking patterns. Instead of creating more machine empires like the Nexus, the galaxy now worked with AIs that could think independently while choosing to cooperate with organic life. The Memorial Garden on Harmony Station had grown to cover several levels of the station. Names from dozens of species were carved in stone, representing those who had learned to fight like humans and die protecting others. But beside the memorial was something else. A training center where new generations learned that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to remember how to be uncivilized. Captain Elena Vasquez closed her eyes and let the Earth's sun warm her face. She had awakened from 2 centuries' sleep to find a galaxy on the brink of extinction. Now that galaxy was learning to embrace the chaos that humans had always understood, that unpredictability, adaptability, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for others were sometimes the only things that stood between existence and extinction. The Last Stand Protocol had succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams. Humanity had saved the galaxy not through superior technology or advanced civilization, but by teaching others how to fight like humans when fighting like humans was the only option left. And in academies across the galaxy, young officers of every species learned the most important lesson the veterans had to teach: that chaos, properly applied, was just another word for hope. Epilogue: The Garden of Memory. 1 year after the end of the Nexus War, representatives from every council species gathered at Harmony Station for the first annual Day of Remembrance. The Memorial Garden had grown again, now covering an entire section of the station with walkways winding between monuments to different battles, different worlds, different species that had learned to survive by embracing chaos. At the center of the garden stood a simple monument, not to any particular battle or hero, but to the concept that had saved them all. The inscription, written in 47 different languages, read simply, "In memory of those who learned that order and chaos are not enemies, but partners in the dance of survival. They taught us that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is remember how to be uncivilized." Above the inscription was a symbol that had become the unofficial emblem of the new galactic military doctrine: a honeybagger, small and seemingly harmless, but with eyes that held the wisdom of species that had survived by refusing to surrender. Young officers from across the galaxy made pilgrimages to read those words and understand their meaning. They learned about humans not as primitive warmongers, but as teachers who had shown the galaxy how to survive when survival seemed impossible. And in the Memorial Garden, among the stones bearing the names of the dead, new life grew. Plants from 100 worlds, chaotic in their diversity but beautiful in their combined existence, proved that order and chaos could create something neither could achieve alone. The Last Stand Protocol was complete. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans, and it would never be the same.